Russia is the largest country in the world. Of all the 195 countries in the world today, none compares in size to Russia. Stretching across 11 time zones and more than 17 million square kilometers, it dwarfs every other nation. So vast is Russia that even Canada, the second largest country in the world, could fit inside of it nearly twice. But how did Russia grow so big? After the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, the 15 constituent republics inherited its massive size. 5 of these republics were the original Russian Empire from 1721 to 1917, which was then re-established in 1993. These include present-day Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, and Latvia. Over the centuries, Russia expanded its territory through conquest, colonization, and sheer size. By the early 20th century, it stretched from the Baltic Sea in the west to the Pacific Ocean in the east. Today, it's even bigger. The addition of eastern Ukraine, Crimea, and the Kuril Islands brought Russia's total land area to over 17 million square kilometers. Welcome to my channel, Animate the Past. Did you know that Russia wasn't always Russia? Centuries ago, the lands we now call Russia were not united. Instead, they were home to scattered tribes and small Slavic settlements. But by the 9th century, Norse adventurers, known as the Rus, sailed down rivers like the Volga and Dnieper, founding cities such as Novgorod and Kiev. Over time, these newcomers blended with the local people to form the first recognizable states. These early Russian states were made up of many different peoples, including Vikings, Slavs, and Finnic tribes. They traded along the rivers, bringing in goods from as far away as Constantinople and the Abbasid Caliphate. As the states grew, so did the wealth of the elite, and they built magnificent churches and monasteries, some of which remain to this day. But as we enter the 13th century, the Mongol armies are on the march, and their leader, Batu Khan, is eager to add the Russian states to his empire. Over the next 2 centuries, the Mongols would come to dominate much of the region, but they never fully conquered it. And during that time, a new city began to rise in the north. Moscow was a small trading post, but as the Mongols grew weaker in the 15th century, it became the center of a new Russian kingdom. Under the rule of Ivan the Terrible, that kingdom grew to encompass all of the old Russian states. But as we enter the 17th century, the country was in sharp decline. Famine, war, and plague had taken a terrible toll on the population, and the ruling elite were caught up in a deadly game of palace intrigue. In the midst of all this chaos, a new group emerged, the Cossacks, fierce warriors who carved out a life for themselves on the edge of the empire. But even they could not save Russia from the coming darkness. In the 18th century, Peter the Great would set about modernizing the country, but he would rule over a vast empire that was nearly 1,000 miles wide. That's the size of Texas, the largest contiguous state in the U.S. Mongol era. In the 13th century, everything changed. The Mongols were a nomadic tribe from the Asian steppes who created the largest contiguous land empire in history, and they were on a mission to smash everything that stood in their way. Their armies crushed cities like Baghdad and Kyiv, leaving behind only smoldering ruins. And then they turned their sights on the Slavic tribes living along the eastern European coast of the Black Sea. The year is 1238, and Grand Prince Yuri II of Vladimir has just received a letter from the Khan of the Golden Horde, demanding that he submit and pay tribute or face the wrath of the Mongols. Yuri didn't take the threat seriously at first. He was a warrior, a holy man, and a lawmaker. But when the Mongols attacked and destroyed his trading city of Torzhok, Yuri knew he had to do something. So he assembled an army and prepared to fight. But as he looked out over his forces, he knew he didn't stand a chance. On one side were the troops of the Golden Horde, a force of highly trained warriors who thrived on battle. On the other side were Yuri's hastily assembled troops, made up of farmers and tradesmen who had never seen combat. Yuri's army was no match for the Mongols. They were defeated and scattered, and Yuri barely escaped with his life. To make matters worse, the Mongols weren't done. They continued to press their advantage, advancing deep into Slavic lands. City after city fell before them, and soon it seemed as if nothing could stop them. But then they came across a small, insignificant town. It wasn't much of a city. Its wooden houses were poorly built, and its cobblestone streets were in terrible condition. But it was important, because it was the home of the Prince of Moscow. And this is where the story of Moscow begins. You see, back then, Moscow wasn't some world-class city. It was a tiny settlement of a few thousand people. But the Mongols didn't know that. To them, it looked like any other big city, and so they attacked. But as their soldiers went through the town, they realized it wasn't what they expected. There were no fancy palaces or overflowing granaries. All they found were poor people living in poverty. Disappointed and angry, the Mongols left Moscow in ruins and headed back to the capital. But little did they know, this would be the last time they would ever attack Moscow. Because while the Mongols had destroyed the city, they had inadvertently created the conditions for its rise to power. See, before the Mongol invasion, the Slavic lands were mostly independent and self-governing, but now they were under the control of the Golden Horde. And as the centuries passed, the people of Moscow began to chafe under the yoke of foreign domination. They wanted to be free. But there was a problem. They couldn't get the other principalities to join them. You see, the Mongol Empire was vast, and the Golden Horde, which controlled Russia, was just a part of it. And although the Mongols were hated, the various Russian principalities had grown accustomed to paying tribute and staying out of each other's way. But Moscow wasn't like the others. It had been all but wiped out by the Mongols, and it had suffered greatly under their rule. And so the people of Moscow began to resist, secretly at first, then openly. They led rebellions against the Mongols, trying to drive them out of their land. And the other principalities watched as Moscow took on the might of the Golden Horde, and time and again, they refused to help. Slowly but surely, though, Moscow grew stronger, and the other principalities began to weaken. By the mid-1400s, it was clear that Moscow was the center of resistance against the Mongols, and that it was the only hope for the Slavic lands. The people of Moscow had been through so much, had suffered so much, that they were willing to do what the others weren't, to fight, to resist, to rebel. By the end of the 15th century, Moscow was the most powerful principality in Russia, and it was ready to take the next step towards greatness. To understand how Russia became the largest country in the world, we must go back to the 16th century. At that time, the various lands that would make up Russia were still relatively small and weak. The most powerful of these was the Grand Duchy of Moscow, which was ruled by a dynasty of princes. They controlled much of northern and central Russia and had recently thrown off the yoke of the Mongols who had previously dominated the region. But beyond the familiar landscapes of northern and central Russia lay a vast, untamed wilderness. For centuries, this area had been out of reach because of the Ural Mountains, which acted as a barrier between the settled agricultural lands of Russia and the endless forests and plains of Siberia. But now, with the Mongol threat removed, Russian explorers and adventurers known as Cossacks began to push beyond the Urals. Within a century, in the year 1600, Russian explorers reached the Pacific Ocean. This remarkable feat of exploration and conquest was made possible by the vast distances involved. To put it simply, Siberia was huge and largely empty. The nomadic peoples who lived there were no match for the Cossacks, and so Russia began to swallow up the Siberian wilderness, incorporating it into their empire. By the end of the 17th century, Russia's borders stretched from the Baltic Sea in the west to the Pacific Ocean in the east. This eastward expansion would continue in the 18th and 19th centuries. Under the rule of powerful leaders such as Peter the Great and Catherine the Great, Russia fought wars against the Ottoman Empire and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, absorbing parts of Poland, Ukraine, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. By the 1800s, Russia was recognized as a true global power. Its size, however, made it difficult to modernize as quickly as Western Europe. But that's a story for another day. The 20th century brought about a revolution in Russia. In 1917, the monarchy collapsed, and after years of civil war, the Soviet Union emerged. Despite being weakened by internal conflict, Russia under the Soviet Union remained vast and powerful, extending its influence across Eastern Europe during the Cold War. But by 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved, leaving behind the modern Russian Federation, which still stretches from the Baltic Sea to the Pacific Ocean. So how did Russia become so big? In short, Russia's size can be attributed to three factors. First, the vast emptiness of Siberia allowed for easy territorial expansion. Second, the lack of significant obstacles such as mountains or rivers hindered the creation of natural borders. Third, the Russian leaders' desire for power and prestige motivated them to conquer new lands. What are your thoughts on Russia's size? Do you think it's a blessing or a curse? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content. Thanks for watching.